My name is Ellen Bass. I am a faculty member at Drexel University. This is a seminar series. This is the second one of three that's focusing on helping people prepare for the academic job market. As you can see here, we did have one meeting already on July 30. We are putting all of these on YouTube, so you can see here the link. Today we're going to have a talk about preparing. So the first talk, I should say, was about how to prepare your application. This next talk, the one today, is about the interview process. The third will be about how to actually negotiate for your position. And for that third one, I've invited my colleague, Amy Throckmorton. She's an excellent negotiator and she's quite excellent. She's given this talk in the past and I've actually watched her do it and she's really good. So the two of us are gonna tag team on this last one. All of these will be on YouTube and we'll send those links out later. So just as a recap, the faculty search process and what we went over last time is how do we actually get to the point where you have submitted your application. And as I went over last time, there is a group of people who advocated for the position and there's a group of people who are now on a search committee and they will be the ones who you will interact with at the very next step. And that will be the telephone interview. So what happens after you submit your applications is there's an initial evaluation, which I'll talk about, and there's a down select to the telephone interview. I call it a telephone interview. It could be on Zoom, but people somehow tend to call it the telephone interview. Then what happens is there's another round. And so there's a down select from the telephone interview. Usually it is those who are being selected for the campus interview from which the search committee gets references. So don't be surprised if your references are not contacted and you get invited for a telephone interview. It's very normal. We don't like to ask for references unless we really think you're coming to campus. We try to, minimize the work. And I'm going to talk about the telephone interview today as well as the campus interview. After the interview process, then you may be given an offer. And you need to think about that though earlier because it's possible during the campus interview the negotiation process will get started. All right, so what happens after you've slaved over that application? The search committee comes together. They will have a strategy. It is very unlikely, especially if there are 200 or 300 applicants. It's very unlikely that every member of the search committee looks at every application. Usually what happens is there's an assignment of applicants to 2 or more members of the search committee. But depending upon how many applications and how many members of the search committee, you may not actually get reviewed by a member of the search committee in that filter process. Each member of the search committee will make a short list. So let's just pretend there's 200 applications and there's 5 people on the search committee. So each person might look at 60 because they want to do some overlap and whatnot. Each of those people who looked at 60 might come back to the search committee with their short list, and they might say, here's my top 20. So now all those short lists needs to be put together, and then there might be some negotiation there. It's quite a lively lively set of meetings, figuring out who to bring in for that telephone interview. Now, it's really interesting how people make these decisions about who to telephone interview. You have to meet the need of the department. That's why you really need to make sure that you look at that position announcement. We talked about that last time. But also, clearly, they're looking at you and your application itself. So, as I mentioned last time, your application has to get into the short list so that you can be part of the telephone interviews. Now, I explain this like it's a linear process, but if there's an applicant who looks like the greatest person that ever lived for that department, even though there's an application deadline, and they might say all the applications, will be received until October 1 or December 1, and a great application comes in September 15th, they may decide to get a jump on that applicant because they want to bring that person in and get them to commit to come to their university right away. So even though the deadline says, applications can come in until December 1, don't think that the committee isn't going to start looking at applications before that time. And also, it's possible that they might telephone interview somebody that they think is phenomenal early. It's, these are human processes, and human processes have, differences in how they're done. So to be clear, the telephone interview is going to include more people than who they want to bring to campus. So there might be 10 or even 20 telephone interviews. Those telephone interviews are relatively short, 30 minutes. They'll tell you how long they are. They could be as long as an hour. Whereas the campus interviews have many fewer people brought in, maybe 3 to 5. The other difference to think about is those telephone interviews are done by the search committee, but the campus interview includes the search committee, department members, the department head. You could have faculty from other departments who might be interested because of your synergistic research area, and it can be multiple days. And I'm going to show you what some of these might look like, but just to give you a sense that the telephone interview, while it's a very short screening process, it's how you get to the on-campus interview. All right, if you get invited to a telephone interview, congratulations. There might have been 200 applications, and they might be telephone interviewing 10. So you have already beaten the odds, right? You are 10 people out of 200. And mind you, we might be bringing 4 people to campus. So getting to the telephone interview phase is really much harder than getting to the campus interview. I can't tell you how many people don't understand that. And it's why your application really needs to be good, because you want to make it to that interview. What are the search committee thinking about to down select from, let's say, that 10 down to the 4 that are going to come for the campus interview? They are looking for fit. Are you a good fit for the department? You look great on paper. That's why you got picked for the telephone interview. Now they're looking for fit, and we're going to talk about what that means. How does the telephone interview work? Usually, like I say, there's 5 to 10 people on the search committee. They have questions they're going to ask you. A lot of times they'll split the questions up. So the same person might ask the same question to all 10 people on the telephone interview. And a different person might ask the second question. But you would never know that because you've only been on one of the interviews. So you'll never know that that was their question. You should give short answers. Why? It's a 30-minute to a 60-minute interview. You don't know how many questions they have, and you don't want them to not get to ask all their questions. So I'm going to tell you what the questions are, at least what they've been when I've been an applicant and when we've been on a search committee. You can prepare some answers ahead of time. So let's see. Here are some sample questions. I'm going to walk through them, but basically they're, why do you want to come here? What kind of research do you do? What do you want to teach? What will you add to the department? So they're going to ask you, absolutely, why do you want to come here? Why do you want this position? It'll probably be the first question they ask you. Have notes prepared. I promise you, you will get this question. You want to talk about the department and the college's mission, which I'll tell you how you can find that out. You might want to talk about colleagues. So I want to come to Drexel. I want to be in the information science department. My area is human-centered computing. I know that you have Ellen Bass and Andrea Forte and Alex Sarkovich, and I know I could immediately collaborate with them. I know that they have an excellent program in gaming over in Westfall, and my area is virtual reality, and I would like to work with the gaming faculty. I would love to be able to work with Frank Lee. I mean, sound like you're already there. Like, tell them why you want to go. Concrete reasons. Not, don't worry about the wishy, oh, they have a great reputation, it's got a great ranking. We know that, but be more specific about really why you want to come to that department. Also, every university has a strategic plan. They have institutes and centers and different facilities. If you're coming to a particular area, talk about that. So for example, my former PhD student, Ziho Kang, was going to Oklahoma for the interview, and he does work in eye tracking, had done some work with me in weather decision making. And I said, you know, make sure that you let them know that, you know, you can't shake a stick in Norman, Oklahoma and not bump into a meteorologist, that the National Weather Center's there. So that's one of the reasons you want to go to Oklahoma. I know if you're coming to the Philadelphia area, perhaps you want to collaborate with Big Pharma. We have a lot of Big Pharma here, or there may be medical centers that you're interested in. So how do you get this information? How do you know that, how are you able to do the deep dive so that you can answer this question? Go on the university's website. They all have strategic plans, they all have missions, colleges all have messages from the dean. Many of the colleges and departments have strategic initiatives. All universities have centers and institutes. Look at them, see which ones look like they match your interests, see what faculty are associated with those centers or institutes. I picked all of these examples from Drexel, but I can tell you, you'll find this information from the other institutes. So if you're going to that institute, if you're going to that university and you're already saying, look, I'm really very interested in collaborating with the faculty in the Institute of X, my area of expertise is Y, and I know that Professor so-and-so from the College of so-and-so is associated with that institute, and I would be really very interested in collaborating with that professor. Wow, that really sounds like you want to come to that place. All right, so you've convinced them that you're a fit for the institution. They will then ask you about your research. They may ask you, what's your area of expertise? They may ask you, why is your research important? They may ask you, what are the societal implications of your research? They may ask you how you will build and support your research program. I am positive they will ask you questions about your research program. And I am positive they're interested in hearing what you will do next. You all have PhDs. We know that you did research, but that research will have been done by the time you get to campus as a faculty member. They're interested in hearing about what you plan to do. So you can briefly tell them about your dissertation work, and you should. And when you do, you should make clear what your area of expertise is, and ensure that they understand that you're excellent at it. But you wouldn't be on the telephone interview if you didn't go to a good place and have a good advisor, and you probably wouldn't be on the telephone interview if you haven't published out of your dissertation already, at least something. So, you know, they're already somewhat convinced that you're an excellent scholar. So they want to hear about what you want to do next. Now, you probably had a future work section in your dissertation. If you haven't written your dissertation yet because you're still, you know, midstream, still start thinking about that. In fact, this should be in your research statement in the application in the first place. But they're going to want to hear it on the telephone interview. There are ways that you can also augment your thinking about future research. Go on the National Academy's site and see if there have been any consensus studies in the area of your research, or see if there are any calls out by the National Science Foundation, NSF, or some of the other government agencies looking for proposals in your area. Because there's nothing wrong. In fact, it's recommended for you to say, you know, my research area, and I'll just talk from my background, you know, my research area is in human automation interaction. Earlier in my career, I was more focused on single operator and single system support. Later, I've been broadening to look at single operator of multiple systems, such as single operator of a multi-UAS, multiple drones. And I've also been focusing on human-human coordination. I'm interested in growing my research program in 2 domains, air transportation and also in healthcare. I recently collaborated with, now I'm gonna lie a little bit because this is what I did, but I'm making pretend I'm you. I recently collaborated with my advisor on writing an R01, and that R01 focused on transitions of care from the surgery ward in ICU onto the floor. And I know that there are opportunities within the NIH to be able to write proposals in this area. So, you know, you can kind of wend in some of your skills in having collaborated with your advisor on writing a proposal, and also show that you understand where funding might come. So I think this is really a critical area. Take some notes, be prepared to tell them about your research area and how you think you will move your research forward. Make sure that you've reviewed the call. If they have a call and it says, we're looking for someone in human factors, and you say, I do human automation interaction, which is what I just did, I might lose somebody who doesn't understand that human automation interaction is a subset of human factors. So if I had the call in front of me and I had taken notes, I would have said, my research falls in the broad area of human factors, and specifically, my research falls here. That lets the person who's read the call but doesn't understand all the details about human factors to know that I'm a fit. What about preparing for the teaching questions? They're definitely going to ask you questions about teaching. They're going to want to know what teaching experience you have. They're going to want to know what you would be prepared to teach. They may even ask you about their curriculum and if there's anything you think that's missing out of their curriculum. So let's talk about those right now. If you've taught a course, this is great. You can talk about a course that you've taught. You can discuss whether you developed the course or whether you had inherited the course from somebody else. And you could talk about whether you taught that course face-to-face or on, if it's, in today's world, you may have taught it online. You could talk about the challenges that you had and how you overcame them, things of that nature. Let's say you have not taught a course. You still have teaching experience. You may have given a guest lecture. So I always try to get my PhD students to give guest lectures in my classes just so they can say they have some teaching experience. You may have been a grader. You may have done office hours for some class. Let's say you haven't had any of those experiences. You weren't a teaching assistant, you didn't grade, none of the above. You may have done other mentoring kinds of activities. Talk about those. A lot of times our graduate students might work with us in the summer when we bring in undergraduates and high school students into our lab. That's mentoring. That would count as teaching. You may be the senior PhD student or a postdoc in someone's lab, and you may be helping the advisor train those students. That also counts. You may be doing outreach activities or things part of student groups. So you may give some lectures in a student group about different topics. So if you have direct teaching experience, lead with that. But if you don't, think about other ways in which you can show that you've been teaching. This material should be on your CV and it should be in your teaching statement, which we talked about last time. You must look at the university catalog, course catalog. You must look at the academic programs that are being offered in that department, and you must be able to say what you could teach. So if you're applying, for example, to the Department of Information Science at Drexel, and they ask you, what would you like to teach? You could say, at the undergraduate level, I know you have a bachelor's degree in data science and in information science and in cybersecurity. I know on the computer science side, you have an undergrad in software engineering. And in those programs, I could teach info and the number, info number, CS number, right? Like tell them what courses you could teach. You could say, I'm immediately able to teach, let's say, Info 608, the master's level HCI course. I notice that you have a course in social computing, info, whatever. With preparation, I would be prepared to teach that course as well. So you could frame it that way. You could talk about what courses you're immediately able to teach because you've taken them in the past or you've taught them in the past. And then you could say what courses you think you could teach if you had more preparation time. Let me suggest that you have a few courses to mention. If they think there's only one course that you would be able to teach, they may not want to bring you on the on-campus interview. And the reason for that is you have to be able to teach some things. And if there's only one thing you say that you're willing to teach or could teach, that's a tough mark. And that's why I say to you, you might look at all their offerings and make some suggestions about what is useful or what you could teach right away, where you would be the most useful. But, list a few stretch courses. Likely, if you get hired as an assistant professor, they're going to give you the courses that are very close to your wheelhouse. But this is the telephone interview. You are not signing on the dotted line. You just want to make it to the on-campus interview. So have a few, I would say 3 or 4 courses, maybe 2 at the undergrad level, 2 at the grad level, that you feel you could absolutely teach with no issue. Another set of questions they're going to ask you is, what do you think you're going to bring to our department? And what strengths do you have? They will definitely ask you this question. They may not ask it to you in these words, but what they want to know is what you're bringing to the department. So I'll just give you some examples. Let's say your area of expertise is in eye tracking and vision research. You could say, my area of expertise is in human-computer interaction and usability. My expertise is in eye tracking and visual search. I noticed that you have faculty who do work in looking at social media. I could immediately work with them because while they're looking at the actual content that's being generated, I could help them on analyzing some of the visual data, and together we could have a much richer collaboration. So you want to talk about your strengths and what you know how to do, and at the same time show that you're not an 100% overlap on someone they already have. You do not want to look like you're an exact clone of a faculty member they already have, because they already have that faculty member and they want you to be a synergistic addition. You might also talk about some domains. I know that you have this and this and this faculty, and they've done a lot of work in the healthcare domain, and they've done a lot of work looking at how physicians and nurses work in the inpatient setting. However, all of my work has been done in home care, and there's a lot of challenges between the inpatient and the home care settings. And so what I would bring are a whole suite of methods that are more applicable in home settings, which are much more complicated to study. In the hospital setting, you have routine schedules, it's relatively set environments. In the home setting, you have to worry about clutter, you have to worry about pets, you have to worry about family members and noise and poor lighting conditions and such. And so what I would bring is the ability for the department to be able to do research in a much more wild environment than is currently done today. So even though you might be completely overlapping those researchers, you sound completely different, right? So think about how you're going to bring strength to the department and how you're going to show that you are a fit but yet not an exact cookie cutter of someone who's already there. I can promise you, you'll get a question about whether you have any questions. I promise you that. And it'll come at the end. And you should have some questions. And by the way, you should have questions because you will not know the answers to the 2 questions that I have listed here. What is the next step in the process? You should ask them. So I'm very excited about this phone interview. You know, what happens next? And they should be able to tell you. They might not be able to give you details. They might not be able to tell you you're number 6 of 10 telephone interviews. But they might say to you, well, we're expecting to bring applicants to campus next month. They might, you know, they might be able to give you some kind of, you know, time frame for that. So I would ask them that, because you need to start preparing for the campus interview. They may ask you some questions about inclusion. They may ask you about diversity and things of that nature. That I didn't put it on the slide, but it's now becoming almost a standard question. It might actually be a standard question now. So I would be prepared to answer that question as well. Keep in mind, this interview is about 30 minutes. They probably have 5 or 10 questions they want to ask you. Keep your answers to a minute. They will follow up with you. It doesn't have to be 59 seconds, but don't go to 2 minutes. You know, have like minute-long answers that you prepare. They can always follow up with updated questions if they want to probe a little bit more. Your answers to these telephone interview questions is not the same thing as your job talk. It's not your dissertation defense. You're just answering their questions. So have some short answers prepared so that you're feeling good about what you're going to say. They may ask you additional follow-on questions. Just be honest. Give them a good answer. If you don't know something, you can tell them. You know, if they ask you a question you don't know the answer to, let's say you haven't defended your dissertation yet, and you haven't scheduled the defense yet, and they say, when are you defending? I would tell them, you know, my projected defense date is May 2021, but I haven't scheduled it yet. And I'll be happy to follow up with you when I have more detail. Don't get into a whole long, I don't know, COVID, IRB's holding me up. Just short and sweet. If they say to you, you know, will you be available to come in the fall? Tell them, I've spoken with my advisor and that's my plan. Absolutely. Don't get into if and this and this and that. Just don't do it. Just answer the questions short and sweet. Have prepared answers. If they want more detail, they'll ask you for more detail. Okay. It is very likely that your telephone interview is going to be on Skype or WebEx or some telecom system. In fact, it's going to be very similar to what's happening right now. Start thinking about that. If you live in an apartment and you share it with 4 people and there's dogs barking, figure out where you're going to have these interviews. You know, you may need to work with your living situation to try to make sure that you have a nice, quiet environment. Think about how you're going to set up your camera. Right now, I'm positive that you can see the light reflecting off my glasses. I can see it in my reflection, you know, when I look in the mirror. Is it a showstopper? I don't know. I don't think so. But if you can figure out where you're going to have it and like think about how to set up the lighting so it's you're not distracting people, I think that would be really good. Make sure you're that you look good and that you feel good. I've heard these stories about people, they're coming to interviews, they're wearing pajama pants. I find that it's important to make sure that you feel good at these interviews. And sometimes dressing up, well, even though they won't see you, it just helps you feel better. So do what you need to do to make yourself feel good. To the best of your ability, try to sit still. If a person is fidgeting in the chair, look how it shows. So as you can see, I got myself a chair. It's very comfortable. I can sit there for an hour without being too fidgety. And does it mean you can't move? No. If I want to take a sip of water, it's not a problem, but it is really distracting when you're trying to talk to somebody and they're kind of uncomfortable. So think about these things up front. What you want to do during this telephone interview is to make it to the next step. And if you're really distracting the listeners, it's really hard for them to help you. All right, let's assume you have your telephone interview. Now, what's the next thing you want to do? You want to email the search committee chair, thank them for the telephone interview, and make sure they know that you're still interested in the position. Mention something. I really enjoyed, the telephone interview. I was very excited when you told me about the new strategic initiative that's going on in your department. In that email that you send, if you have any other constraints, let them know. You told me that the next step is that you're going to be bringing people to campus in the next month. I just wanted to let you know that from October 5th to October 9th is the Human Factors Ergonomics Society conference that's online. And that's really a tough week for me. So if we could do it before or after, that would be fantastic. By the way, now they know I have a presentation to make, right? So it makes me look good by giving them that constraint. Before your on-campus interview, you must prepare your job talk. It is really important. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But they're going to ask you for a title, an abstract, a short bio, maybe 150 words, and a photo so that they can advertise your job talk. Get that ready. You can work on that now, right? Once you start being invited for telephone interviews, you should have your job talk information ready because if they invite you to campus, they need it. You should be part of the scheduling of your campus interview. If there are faculty that you definitely want to meet with, and by the way, you will have figured them out because you would have gone and looked through the campus, not just the department, but the campus. You've looked at these institutes and different things, and maybe you found some people you want to meet with. Make suggestions. That's a win-win because now you're going to have people at that institution who might weigh in when it's time to decide who they want to hire, but also it makes you look like a better fit. You're making some suggestions about who you want to meet with. The campus interview is probably the most tiring thing you're gonna do. It's multiple days. It's very, a lot of back-to-back-to-back meetings. As you can see here, I have an interview schedule. It's just a made-up one, but it doesn't look very different from ones that I've been on. You land at an airport, they pick you up, they take you to the hotel. You have about a half an hour to check in and maybe an hour. Someone comes to pick you up, you're immediately going to dinner. The dinner goes for a couple hours. You're finally back to the hotel at 8:30, 9, and now someone's picking you up the next morning for breakfast. So you're in, you're meeting with the search committee, you might meet with students, you're meeting with professors back to back to back to back. Get that interview schedule and look these people up and be prepared for each person. Have questions to ask, because sometimes you might walk into someone's office and they might say, do you have any questions for me? And you have a half an hour, and the answer should not be no. So you can ask them questions about how do they recruit PhD students. You can ask them questions about, I'm going to say general faculty questions. You can ask them questions about their research program, but you can also each ask them different questions. I would have a list of generic questions. This is what I do. And then I know I'll ask different professors different questions. Ask them, how does senior design work at this university? How long, what is the average length of a PhD program here? I mean, you can have some backup questions just in case. But I would actually research each of these people and have questions that are particular to them. Oh, here are some more generic questions. What's the teaching load here? These are questions you might say for your meeting with the department head, but when you meet with the full professors, you could also ask them, what are the expectations for scholarship? What is the tenure process like here? At some universities, you get a 3-year contract, and then you go through a third-year review, and then if that's renewed, you then go for tenure. Some places you get a 6-year contract to start, but you still have a mid-year after 3 years. So you can ask some questions about that. What is the support for teaching? Does everyone get a TA? If you ask these kinds of questions, they know that you're really thinking about coming there, right? So have a list of questions that you can ask during your campus interview, and you can scatter them around with different faculty, especially when they might not have much to say to you. They may just ask you to ask them questions. I mentioned to you that at your campus interview, you should be prepared to negotiate. We'll talk about that in the next session. But when you meet with department head, if they really like you and the feedback has gotten back to the department head, because usually that's the last person you meet with, and sometimes it's the dean. By the way, you might also meet with the associate dean for research and some others. If they really like you, they may start negotiating with you while you're still there. So that's why we're doing the negotiations talk next time. In your job talk, they'll schedule it perhaps for an hour. Do not take the whole hour. Find out ahead of time what they expect. 40 minutes with 10 minutes for questions. Figure the first 5 minutes, probably doesn't start on time. You gotta have, someone's gonna interrupt you. You know how faculty are. You're gonna get interrupted, in the middle. So make sure that your job talk does not take the full amount of time. Make sure that you pose your research questions at a higher level and also at the detailed. Not everybody or job talk is going to be from your discipline. So you should have research questions that are at a higher level. I'm interested, my main research question is, how do you couple people with technology? In particular, we have a lot of unmanned aircraft systems, or what people call drones now. Companies like Amazon and others want to do package delivery. This idea that you might have a fleet or a swarm of drones out there delivering packages means that you may have one person controlling more than one drone. And there's a lot of issues with respect to the technology that's required and the research that I'm specifically interested is X, all right? And then you can get into your deeper pinhead research question. But make sure you ground it in something so that people understand that your research matters. I've gone to a lot of job talks where I can't tell what the candidate did at all. You know, they're working on an R01 that has 4 PIs at 4 institutions, and the candidate uses the word we through the whole talk, and I can't really tell what that candidate did. So if you're talking about a bigger project, frame what the bigger project was, and then say specifically, you know, we had a 5-year R1 looking at the transitions from the OR onto the floor. In particular, my work was looking at what is the information needs for the nurses that are on the floor who need to be able to accept these patients. Typically, they get this kind of information. But what we found was this, and then you could start talking about the methods and the result, but you know, give them that picture about what you did and what was your role. You know, in my role, I developed the questionnaire, I developed the observational study, I did the qualitative analysis as you go through the methods. You might also say as you go through the methods. However, we had nurse subject matter experts that reviewed our qualitative findings. We had 3 rounds of reviews. This, right? So it's really clear what you did, what the nurses did. I've also been to a lot of job talks where the actual job talk was really hard to follow. The person was very fidgety. They had a hard time answering questions. The faculty are not just listening to your job talk because they want to understand your research. They're also thinking about what kind of teacher are you going to be, what kind of instructor. If you can't present your research in a good way, they're going to think, wow, this person's not going to be able to teach. So spend some time on your job talk, spend some time on the slides, spend some time on practicing how you're going to do that talk. Spend some time on the timing. In your job talk is also where they're going to think about your inclusion. So you may be able to bring some of that into your job talk as well. You know, in our IRB protocol, we were focused on an elderly population who require wound care. In particular, we were recruiting people from a lower and higher socioeconomic status, right? So even though I'm not talking about inclusion, they understand that they understand that I understand issues of socioeconomic status. So you can get some of that information into your job talk, even though you're not specifically talking about inclusion activities. In my job talk, I imagine that I'm already there. So at the end of the job talk, and you should include this at the end of your job talk, some information about what you expect should you get the job. So as you talk about your future work, which you should definitely do, bring into that part of the talk who you might collaborate with at that institution. So as you're closing and talking about your future work, you could say, you know, in my dissertation work, the research really ended here, but it's just the beginning of a larger research program. For example, I'm interested in these research questions. And in fact, one of the reasons why I'm interested in coming here is because so-and-so and so-and-so have synergistic research, and we may be able to write some collaborative proposals. And that's kind of how you can kind of win some of that information into your job talk. You control your job talk. So if people are interrupting you and it's getting you flustered, there's a couple tactics you could use. You could say, you know, I'm going to get to that. I just want to get through a few more ideas before I get there. But at the end, if I haven't answered your question, please ask it again. That's a really polite way to say, please don't interrupt me. I'm on a roll and I'm going to get flustered, right? So you will, I don't know why, but even when people are told not to interrupt, they just interrupt. So practice a couple of those too, you know, figure out how you want to handle it. I recommend for people not to take too many questions in the middle of the talk because you may never get to the end. But if you get interrupted and you do need to cut, think ahead of time. You could say, for example, as you get into some of the methods, for time, I'm gonna skim over some of the methods, but they're discussed in this paper, and I'm happy to discuss them further. And that way, you can, you know, cut. I would be very careful, and I would keep your clock next to you as you're giving your talks, or, you know, keep something so that you're keeping pace. Something that I also do, and I'm actually doing it now, I number my slides and I know how many minutes in I should be by the time I get to that slide, so I know I need to speed up. I want to point out that there are a lot of source materials that you might want to look at. Some of these source materials I actually looked at to help me make this talk. So, you know, do take advantage of other sources. I want to leave a little time for questions. So just to sum up, today we talked about how you get to the telephone interview phase and the kinds of questions you might be asked and how to prepare. We talked a little bit about what the campus interview would look like and how to prepare for that. In the next talk, we're going to talk about the offer. There was a question in the chat about whether slides will be available. Yes, we're going to actually put this whole talk on YouTube, and I might take some of the images out or I might do some compression to get the slides small enough, but everything's available to anyone who wants them. Also, feel free, actually, what did we do last time? Last time, I think we actually gave everybody who had registered the link to the YouTube video, and we also provided the slides to everyone. I am personally very committed to ensuring that anyone who wants information about how to get a leg up on the faculty interview process gets it. So feel free to share materials with other people. I created these materials. I'm not holding on to any intellectual property. Feel free to show them to whoever you want. And the same thing, clearly, if it's on YouTube, you know, all of it's there. So I can see the chat. So if somebody else has some questions, you know, getting one as we talk. Sometimes we will chat with the professors from the university at a conference. Does that count as the phone interview? No, it does not count as the phone interview. Let me tell you why. There's a human resources group at every institution, and one has to follow the process. If that HR process includes interviews at conferences, and that's part of the HR process, then that chat might count. But usually, at least in my experience, the chats at the conferences are more of a recruitment kind of a phase. So I will talk to candidates or potential candidates at conferences about, let's say, the open position at Drexel, because I'm excited to get them to apply. I might not even be on the search committee. But I will tell that applicant, let me know when you've applied, and I will go talk to the search committee and say, hey, make sure you're looking for Na's application. She's a winner. It would be wonderful if you would consider her for the telephone interview, or things like that. So you can use the faculty who you know to help you. How do you evaluate facilities during the interview? So let's say, for example, your research, I'm going to go back to the eye tracking. Let's say that your research requires eye tracking. You can ask, what are the usability labs at your institution? You can also ask some questions about the startup package, and we're going to talk about that in the next session on October 1st. Because there's two ways that you're going to get access to facilities. One is you have them yourself in your own lab, or you can use some shared assets. And so you can ask some questions about that. A lot of institutions have their facilities statements on the website, but some of them don't. Also, there are facilities that individual faculty members have in their labs that they'll share with others. Sometimes that doesn't really show up very well on the website. So if you need or want access to particular facilities, these are really good questions to ask, both on the telephone interview and also on the campus interview, and also when you are negotiating your startup package. If you have to choose between teaching experience as a TA and a short seminar that you planned, which one? Oh, talk about them both. Talk about them both. They're going to ask you on the telephone interview about your teaching. It doesn't take about 4 seconds to say, I've taught, Info 608, which is an introductory HCI class for master students. I've also, right? So you can get a lot of information in a few seconds, especially since you're going to get that question and you can be well prepared. The chat's questions are coming in. What are some of the tips you would give to new applicants to increase their chance to be invited for the telephone interview? Watch the other YouTube video. I spent an hour talking about the application, and if you don't have access to the YouTube video, email me and I will send you the link. Oh, Natalie, didn't know you were on. I want to mention we are launching a teaching and college certificate program for postdocs and graduate students in the fall. If you need to gain more teaching experience, please keep an eye. So Drexel, so thank you, Natalie. So at Drexel, we are on the ball and we are providing opportunity for our PhD students and postdocs. So if you're at Drexel, I will say Natalie is your new best friend, and keep your eye out for that information. If you don't, at a minimum, ask the faculty in your home department to let you give a guest lecture. Do a guest lecture on something that you know very well, and then you can put it on your, in your application. So that's why I always have my PhD students give guest lectures. How would you respond to a faculty member's technical question that you may not know because it's outside your area of expertise? I never answer questions that I don't know the answer to. Let's say someone said to me, I'm just going to think of an example. Let's say some detailed question about a piece of technology. I would say to them, I have not used that technology in my research program to date, so I'm not familiar with its benefits. And then I might say to them, are you asking me because you think my research program could benefit from that piece of technology? What are your thoughts? Right? So just turn it right back to them. Or, I would love if you could if I email you, would you be willing to, point me to a link if you think that that technology would be a game changer for me? And that way you seem collaborative, you heard what they asked you. They clearly asked you because you're assuming they think it would be something that would be helpful to you. So you're ascribing them a positive intent and not asking you a question to make you look bad. So that's what I try to do when I get asked something I don't know. I admit I don't know it. I assume they're asking me about it because they think it would be helpful for me. I ask them why they think that would be beneficial to me. And then I ask them if they would send me some pointers so that I can get up to speed on why that piece of technology would be beneficial to me. I will say there are some challenging people you might meet, but what is it? When they go low, we go high, to quote Michelle Obama, just assume they're asking you for a very well-intentioned reason and just answer them back in a well-intentioned answer. Can you apply for more than one position in a department or a college? It depends on, I guess, how the applications are structured. If a particular university or particular department has a bunch of open calls and you go to the HR website and there's different ways to apply, one, I would definitely apply to the one that is most relevant to me. I might reach out to somebody who's on the site, or I might reach out to some faculty and say, I'm really perplexed. I see there's 3 very synergistic positions. Let me answer it at a higher level. You don't want the people who receive your applications to think that you're just applying everywhere and that you're not being choosy. But you also want to be considered for as much as possible. So there's that question, I think, would require perhaps you reaching out to someone on the job ad or someone at that institution to ask them what they think about you applying for more than one position. Because I do worry that there'll be an impression of the people if they know that you've applied to multiple things, that you don't really have an identity, and so you're just going after everything. And it wouldn't be true, but you don't want to give that perception. So reaching out to somebody at the institution might be a better way to go. Somehow my mouse disappeared, and I see that there's more questions in the chat. What happened to my mouse? Oh, there it is. Oh, well, the rest of the comments are all very nice, helpful comments. Well, I want to be respectful of people's time. I do notice that it is 5:03, and I don't want to hold people over. But let me just tell you what will happen is that everyone who's registered will be sent the link for the YouTube video. It might take a little bit of time for us to clean it up and get it up there. We started recording a little bit early, so we'll cut some stuff off at the back end. And also, everyone can have access to the slides. Probably what I'll do is create a PDF, and if it's really big, I may do some optimizations. I might take out a couple of the images that are just really eye candy so that you have all the meat. But I wish everybody an excellent evening. Do please share the information with others who weren't able to attend. And let me just give one more shout out to the talk that we're going to have October 1, which is going to focus on the negotiation, how to prepare, thinking about what should be in your startup package, and how to have the negotiation with the department head or the dean or whoever it is you're going to have that negotiation with. And I'm bringing in our ace, Professor Amy Throckmorton. And so I think it'll be a very lively discussion, and I look forward to having another opportunity to help you with your job process.